Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The fog rolled in so slowly that Dale never noticed the moment it became more than weather. 1 minute the highway stretched ahead in a clean black ribbon, his headlights pushing out a steady cone of pale gold. The next, the world drew in tight around the cab, trimmed to a soft gray cocoon. The distant red taillights of the car he'd been following vanished as if someone had plucked them from the air. He eased off the accelerator, feeling the subtle shift of the loaded trailer behind him. The dash lights painted his hands a muted green where they gripped the wheel. The radio hummed low, a country station dissolving into a wash of gentle static as the miles slid beneath him. Outside, the only shapes were fog, road, and the faint suggestion of guardrails that appeared and disappeared like hesitant thoughts. It was after midnight, somewhere along a stretch of interstate that cut through rolling fields and empty farmland. He knew this route well. Long, straight, quiet. On clear nights, the sky out here opened up wide enough to swallow a man whole. Tonight, the sky was gone. The world ended just beyond his headlights, in a moving wall of pale, textured gray. A green sign grew out of the fog ahead, letters blurred, then sharpening as he drew close. Bell's Hollow. 1 mile. He frowned, the name snagged against a lifetime of mental maps. He knew every truck stop, every diner, every decent patch of shoulder where a man could rest for an hour with the engine idling. Bell's Hollow meant nothing to him. Yet the sign looked new, reflective paint, no visible rust, edges crisp against the mist. He checked the GPS. A straight purple line continued unbroken. No exits for another 20 miles. No towns, nothing. The small blinking arrow of his rig moved along the screen, unconcerned. In the cab, the air felt a little cooler. He reached out and nudged the heater up a notch. The vents sighed softly. The engine's steady drone wrapped around him, comforting, familiar. He took a sip of coffee, now lukewarm, its bitterness grounding. Another sign loomed up. Bell's Hollow. 1/2 mile. Services, food, fuel, lodging. He glanced once more at the GPS. Still nothing. The map remained indifferent, offering empty interstate and flat green land on either side. The fog outside pressed closer to the glass as if it wanted a look inside the cab. The wipers clicked back and forth out of habit, though there was no rain. A faint unease slid through him, thin as a draft beneath a closed door. He told himself it was probably a new development, a town that had sprung up around a truck stop or a cluster of fast food joints. Maps fell out of date all the time. He'd seen it before, but as he rolled on, watching the mile markers drift past, he realized something stranger. The numbers on the little white posts beside the road weren't changing the way they should. The last one had read 214. He passed another. Still 214. A third. 214 again. The same tilt, the same slight bend in the corner. His fingers tightened on the wheel. Ahead, the faint suggestion of an overhead sign took shape in the fog. This one arched over the right lane, massive and inescapable. Exit 17, Bell's Hollow, 1/4 mile. There was no exit 17 on this stretch. He was certain. The certainty came from long nights and countless trips, from muscle memory and the quiet catalog that lived in the back of his mind. The GPS remained stubbornly blank, as if refusing to acknowledge what he was seeing with his own eyes. The lane markers flowed under his truck like a slow white river. His low beams washed over the exit-only arrow painted on the asphalt. The feeling in his chest changed from unease to something heavier, a quiet pressure beneath the sternum, like the first hint of a storm. He told himself he would pass it. Stay on the main line. Fog played tricks. Signs were moved, mismarked. There were sensible explanations. Then he saw the fuel gauge. The needle hovered closer to empty than he liked. He had planned his stop based on the miles he knew, on towns he trusted to be there. But the fog had made him tense, and he'd driven a little faster earlier than he should have. The math, usually simple, felt off tonight, numbers slipping past his mental grip. Perhaps he thought it wouldn't hurt to look, just to see. The ramp appeared on the right, curving away into the fog like a road drawn in chalk and then smudged. The reflective markers along its edge winked in and out. He signaled, more out of habit than necessity, and guided the rig onto the exit. The change was immediate. The sound of the tires altered, climbing from the smooth hum of interstate pavement to a fainter, hollow tone, as if the asphalt here was older, thinner. The fog thickened until it felt like he was driving through wool, dense and textured, swallowing his high beams in a dull white wall. The guardrail was a ghostly silver ribbon beside him, then gone, then back again. He eased down the ramp, foot feathering the brake, listening. The engine noise seemed muted, wrapped in batting. Even the rattles and soft clinks from the trailer were subdued, as if his whole rig were moving under a blanket. At the bottom of the ramp, the road leveled out into an empty intersection. A lone traffic light hung above, swaying slightly in a breeze he couldn't hear. Its red glow diffused into a bleeding circle by the fog. No cross traffic, no headlights, no tail lights, distant or otherwise. To the right, a glowing rectangle of white caught his eye. A sign, "Welcome to Bell's Hollow. Population." The number beneath was obscured, not by fog, but by something like a smear, as if someone had dragged a thumb across wet ink. He squinted. The smear wasn't random. It almost looked like the digits had been there and then gently erased. He turned left, toward the promise of services. The road narrowed, lined with shapes that resolved into buildings as he approached. A small diner with a neon sign that flickered open in a slow, uncertain rhythm. A low-slung motel, its vacancy sign lit in a tired red. A gas station with two old-style pumps under a dim canopy light that buzzed softly. Everything looked recently abandoned. Not ruinous, not broken, just empty in a way that suggested people had stepped out a moment ago and forgotten to come back. The diner's windows glowed faintly from within, but no shadows moved behind them. The motel office door was propped open, a bell above it hanging still and silent. He guided the truck into the gas station lot, gravel crunching softly under the tires. The sound was oddly loud in the muted air. He set the brake, the familiar hiss startling in the quiet. For a long moment, he sat there, hands on the wheel, listening to his own breathing. The fog swirled lazily around the edges of the canopy light like slow-moving smoke. The clock on the dash read 2:17 a.m. He glanced at his phone. No signal. The time on its black screen, 2:17 a.m. He looked at the radio. The station number glowed steady, but no music played, just a soft, faint hiss, like someone breathing through their teeth in the next room. The pump stood a few feet away, its paint faded, numbers on its face behind slightly fogged glass. A small sign on the side read "Self-Service" in letters that had yellowed with age. He hesitated, then slid off the seat. The cab door opened with its usual creak, and the cold air touched his face with a kind of careful delicacy, as though unsure of its welcome. The ground beneath his boots felt solid, but the fog muffled even that contact, swallowing the harsher edges of each step. He walked to the pump, no pad for a credit card, no digital display, only an old mechanical counter, frozen at all zeros. A black-handled nozzle rested in its cradle like it had been waiting for him specifically. He lifted it. The weight was real. The handle was cold. He half expected dust, cobwebs, any sign of disuse, but his hand came away clean. He set the nozzle back down, the metal landing with a small, definite click. Somewhere nearby, a truck engine rumbled past. He straightened, listening hard. The sound was unmistakable, the low, rolling growl of a diesel engine under load, the faint whine of tires on pavement. It grew, approached, and then never fully arrived. There were no growing headlights, no change in the shadows cast by the canopy light, just the suggestion of mass passing on some unseen road, then fading until only the hiss of his own breath remained. He stood there, surrounded by the soft white blur of the fog, hearing nothing else. No insects, no wind in nearby trees, no hum from overworked motel air conditioners. The town breathed in perfect unison with him, and when he held his breath to listen, seemed to hold its own. The clock on his dash still read 2:17 when he glanced back through the windshield. The phone in his pocket agreed. He climbed back into the cab, the instinctive urge to be off the ground rising in him without a name. He didn't bother to unroll his paper atlas or fight the dead GPS. Every part of him, the part accustomed to empty roads and long silences, whispered the same thing: leave. He guided the big rig back to the intersection. The red light still hung there, still swaying gently, never cycling to green or yellow. He waited out of habit, the faint tick of the hazard lights marking time that the dash insisted did not move. At last he rolled through it and followed the signs back toward the interstate. The ramp curved up into the fog. Halfway up, the engine note wavered, just a fraction, like the truck had hit an invisible patch of denser air. His skin prickled. He emerged from the fog onto the open highway as suddenly as stepping from a dim room into bright morning. The fog was gone. The sky overhead was a clear, dark bowl, stars scattered across it in frozen sparks. The road stretched ahead straight and smooth. He checked the mirror. Behind him, the ramp was a dark cut in the hillside. No sign for Bell's Hollow glowed above it. Instead, a weathered board leaned beside the shoulder, half swallowed by weeds. Ramp closed. No services. The letters were faint, the paint peeling. The clock on his dash read 3:02 a.m. His phone agreed. The fuel gauge sat exactly where it had been before he'd taken the exit, as if the detour hadn't cost him a single drop or a single mile. Years later, other drivers would mention odd fog on that stretch, or the feeling of a town sitting just out of sight, waiting whenever night and weather were right. No one ever found Bell's Hollow on a map, or in old records, or in county archives. But on certain nights, a few swore they'd caught the pale suggestion of green overhead through the mist, letters blurred and shifting as they passed. An exit sign, they thought, that seemed to watch them go by. Story number 2. By the time Carla reached the high plateau, the world had narrowed to the span of her headlights and the slow, patient swipe of the wipers. The mountains on either side of the highway were invisible, swallowed by a fog that didn't so much hang in the air as rest there, heavy and deliberate, as if something had laid a quiet hand over the landscape and pressed. Her truck moved through it like a ship through a sleeping sea. The road rose and fell in gentle waves beneath the tires. The asphalt, a dark ribbon with faint white seams that appeared, brightened, and slipped away again under her hood. The speedometer hovered just under the limit, a compromise between progress and caution. She had crossed this stretch a dozen times in every season. But tonight the familiar curves felt different, like a song played in an unfamiliar key. The CB was turned down low, just enough to murmur. Mostly static at this hour, the occasional distant voice frayed at the edges by distance. The dash lights glowed a soft amber, reflecting in the windshield as a faint double image of her hands on the wheel, her face a dim oval beyond. She had been climbing for the last 20 minutes, the air gradually cooling, the fog deepening in stages. It had started as a light ground mist back near the last town fields, exhaling the day's warmth into the night, then thickened into low, drifting bands that pooled in the hollows. Up here, near the ridgeline, it was total, a soft white enclosure that seemed to crease and fold around the cab like layered gauze. Her dispatcher had mentioned it in passing before she left the yard. Patchy fog up on 37, they're saying. Watch your speed on the grade. Patchy, she thought now, watching the world shrink to a careful cone of light, had been optimistic. A green highway sign emerged from the white some distance ahead, letters blurred then sharpening as she approached. Mile, Altmasuch, scenic overlook, 1 mile. She almost smiled at that. Scenic. Somewhere beyond that gray curtain, mountains should be resting like dark waves, valleys cupped in their folds, maybe a scatter of farmhouse lights. Instead, there was only the sensation of height, an empty space, pressing against the unseen edges of the road. Her foot lightened on the accelerator. The overlook pull-off made a convenient place to brake, even if there would be nothing to see but the inside of a cloud. A quick check of straps, a walk around the rig, a stretch of tired legs, then back to the slow rhythm of miles. She flicked the turn signal as the white line to her right widened into the mouth of the overlook entrance. The amber blink reflected back from the fog, a soft, contained pulse. The texture of the pavement changed slightly as she eased the truck onto the wide shoulder, the subtle crunch of gravel under the front tires announcing the edge of the designated parking area. She rolled to a gentle stop, set the brake, and listened as the familiar hiss settled into silence. The engine's low idle became the loudest sound in the universe, a constant, comforting heartbeat. For a moment, she simply sat there, hands resting loosely on the wheel. The fog beyond the windshield shifted in currents too slow to track, its surface almost silky. The idea of leaving the warm cab for the damp chill, just beyond the glass, was briefly unappealing, but habit tugged at her. She flipped on the parking lights, left the engine idling, and slid down from the seat. When she opened the door, the fog appeared to lean in, curious, spilling a faint coolness across her face. The step down to the pavement was short, but the sensation of lowering herself into that pale nothingness made it feel further. The gravel under her boots was damp. Every crunch softened. The air held the clean scent of wet stone and distant pine, with a faint metallic thread from the truck itself. Warm engine, diesel, the ghost of old miles. Somewhere beneath it all was the intangible smell of moisture. Not quite rain, not quite cloud, something in between. She walked slowly along the side of the trailer, hand trailing its cold metal skin, counting tie-downs out of habit. Each ratchet was firm, each strap lay where it should. Her breath hovered briefly in front of her, then dissolved into the larger whiteness. Away from the truck, the silence became more profound. Nothing moved beyond the low hum of the idling engine. No insects, no whisper of wind through unseen trees. The world felt perfectly paused. At the far edge of the pull-off, a low wooden rail marked the beginning of the drop. On clear days, drivers stood there and took photos. A valley pouring away beneath their feet, the road traced like a thin gray wire along the opposite slope. Tonight, the rail was a dark line sinking into fog that looked solid enough to step onto. She placed a hand on the top rail. It was slick with condensation, the wood cool and swollen slightly with absorbed moisture. The sensation under her palm was grounding. Behind her, the truck idled on, a patient giant at rest. Then, faintly, another engine joined it. It came from somewhere down below, in the invisible valley, the sound soft at first, a distant, ascending growl, like a memory of machinery carried on a non-existent wind. It rose slowly, the pitch changing exactly as a heavy vehicle would climb a grade in a lower gear, laboring against gravity. She turned, automatically scanning the highway, but saw only her own truck and the smooth gray wall beyond it. No paired beams of light cut through the fog. No orange clearance lights winked. The highway itself was soundless, a dark strip leading nowhere she could see. Still, the distant engine climbed. Closer now. It had the rounded, throaty tone of an older model, something from a decade or two back, not the cleaner, sharper note of newer rigs. There was a faint accompanying rattle, as if a loose toolbox or set of chains shifted gently with each imaginary bump in the unseen road. Carla listened, curiosity edging into her quiet. Engines didn't sound like that through fog alone. Even in the thickest weather, light and motion betrayed them. Yet the sound continued, positioning itself somewhere below, as if a road wound through the emptiness under her feet instead of dropping away into space. Then, as clearly as if she were standing at the shoulder, she heard the soft hiss of air brakes. The phantom engine settled into a contented idle. The noise hung there in the fog, distinct, joined now by the faintest creak of a door swinging open. The hairs on her arms lifted, not in panic exactly, but in recognition of something misaligned. She found herself picturing another truck pulled off, on an invisible shelf of road just under the blanket of cloud, its driver stepping down into the same damp air, maybe stretching tired shoulders, rubbing a stiff neck, unaware that, somewhere above, she stood at the edge of his sound and nothing more. A voice crackled on the CB inside her cab. The truck's own engine had masked the exact moment it started, but now its uneven murmur floated out through the open door. It sounded like someone trying to tune in a distant station, the words rising barely clear and then dissolving again. Mile 63, you there? Anyone? She watched the faint glow of the CB's orange display through the windshield. No one else was parked at the overlook. The highway, as far as she could see, which wasn't far, remained empty. Another burst of static, then a voice, tired and frayed, slipped through more distinctly. Overlook's gone again. Fog's back. Anyone see the markers this time? The channel number on her unit hadn't changed. It sat on the usual late-night chatter frequency, one she'd scanned all week without hearing that particular voice. She stepped closer to the open door, one hand finding the metal frame, grounding herself as the damp air pooled around her ankles. "Repeat?" came the voice, as if replying to an unheard question. "Just need to know if anyone else is still up here. Feels like I've been circling this spot all night. Mile 63, it keeps showing up. Same sign, same pull-off. Keep thinking I'll get past it. Then there it is again. Anyone?" Her own CB remained untouched. No button pressed, no mic lifted. Yet she could hear every weary syllable, as if she were listening in on a conversation that had already happened and was simply echoing now. Below, the phantom engine idled on in the fog, the rhythm steady, unhurried. Carla's heart beat a little faster, but the fear that rose didn't come with sharp edges. It was softer, an ache of sympathy mixed with the uncanny. Somewhere, some other driver sounded lost in a loop of his own, chasing the same marker over and over on a road that refused to lead him away. The voice crackled again, softer this time, as though moving further down a tunnel. "Guess, keep rolling. Maybe next mile will stick. If anyone hears this, keep an eye on your gauge through the fog. Don't trust the signs." The CB fell back into a hush of static. The unseen engine below revved gently, then began to descend, the pitch changing as if a truck eased away from an unseen shoulder and rolled on. The sound faded, layer by layer, until the valley returned to profound silence. Only her own rig remained, humming steadily at her back. She stood there for a long moment, hand on the doorframe, looking down into the perfect, patient wall of fog pressed against the mountainside. A kind of sadness hovered in the air, thin and light as the mist itself. Eventually, she climbed back into the cab, closing the door with a soft, decisive thud. The interior felt warmer than before, the dash lights gentle, familiar. She reached for the CB mic, thumb resting against the talk button, considering. In the end, she set it back in its cradle without saying a word. The truck eased out of the overlook and back onto the highway. The fog parted before her like a curtain but never lifted, always reforming just beyond the reach of the headlights. A few miles later, the green sign for mile 64 slid past on the right. Numbers clear, unremarkable. Later still, when the altitude dropped and the fog thinned at last into patchy banks, she checked her mirrors out of habit. Against the pale suggestion of mountains fading behind her, there was only empty road. No forgotten overlook. No hidden shelf of shoulder clinging to the ridge. She moved on into clearer air, the memory of the unseen engine, and the lonely voice on the CB lingering with the gentle persistence of a song stuck on repeat. For years afterward, whenever mist gathered along the mountain's flank and mile 63 slipped by her window, she'd notice her hand, almost of its own accord, drift toward the CB mic, listening, just in case the loop had not yet let someone go. Story. Number 3. The fog on the river plain moved differently than mountain fog. It didn't tumble down slopes or cling to trees. It lay low and patient, spreading out in a pale sheet over the flat land, seeping into the shallow ditches and gathering along the asphalt like water slowly rising around the ankles of the highway. Miguel watched it grow thicker in the beams of his headlights as he rolled east, the dark line of the interstate stretching ahead as a floating strip above a drowned world. Somewhere off to his right, beyond the reach of his lights, the river wound through its wide, slow curve. He couldn't see the water, but he could smell it when he cracked the window. A cool, earthy scent, threaded with the faint tang of silt and damp reeds. The dashboard glowed a comforting orange, instruments steady, gauges right where they ought to be. The radio played low. A late-night station caught just well enough out here to be more than static soft rock from another decade, the kind of songs that turned into background noise almost immediately. The rhythmic thrum of the diesel under his feet settled into that same gentle place in his mind. He knew this stretch well enough to anticipate its sparse landmarks, even hidden in fog. An old billboard with its paint peeling, the ghost of an exit that had been closed for years, a sagging fence line that ran beside the road for nearly a mile. He ticked them off in his head as the white veil thickened, each one a familiar shape swallowed and then forgotten again. So when the green sign appeared, hovering out of the mist a few hundred yards ahead, its reflective surface smudged by the fog, he noticed immediately that it didn't belong. Riverbend Rest Area, 2 miles. Truck parking, open. He sat a little straighter, foot easing minutely off the accelerator. Riverbend meant nothing to him. This side of the state had only one decent rest area on his mental map, and that one was still about 40 miles away, perched on a low rise above the floodplain. He would have sworn there was nothing in between but fields and the threat of asphalt. Maybe, he considered, it was new. Budget cycles, highway improvements, some local politician wanting their name on a civic project. But the sign didn't look new. The green was slightly dulled, the white letters softened by a haze of wear that took years to form. The fog pressed closer, drawn in by the warmth of his headlights. The edge of the world shrank to the margins of the road. He glanced at his clock. 3:09 a.m. The right kind of hour for places to exist or not exist as they pleased. 2 miles slipped by in cautious silence. A second sign rose out of the whiteness. Riverbend Rest Area, 1 mile. Next services, 42 miles. That at least fit what he knew. The long, empty run ahead. His shoulders loosened, a practical thought overriding the soft curl of unease. A quick stop would do no harm. Stretch, hit the restroom, refill his thermos. A few minutes to let his eyes reset from peering into the rolling blur. The entrance appeared on the right as a simple dark gap framed by white posts, the reflective surfaces glowing dull and muted. His turn signal clicked in the cab, amber light pulsing faintly against the fog. He eased the truck onto the ramp, feeling the pavement curve gently away from the main line. The change in texture under the tires was subtle but distinct, the smooth interstate giving way to slightly rougher, older concrete. The fog here seemed thicker, a soft wall that closed in tighter as he left the certainty of the highway. Sodium vapor lights glowed somewhere ahead, their orange halos diffused into wide, fuzzy orbs that bled together. The rest area unfolded gradually in those islands of amber. A low one, story building under a flat roof, its brick walls darkened by damp, a row of vending machines faintly lit under a small awning, the outline of picnic tables barely visible beyond, and, closest to him, a broad section of striped pavement designated for trucks, its paint lines ghostly in the mist. Miguel pulled into the first space, aligning the trailer with practiced ease. He set the brake, the hiss sounding oddly loud in the muffled air, and turned off his headlights. For a heartbeat, the cab felt dim, the world outside reduced to bands of distant, murky light cut by his mirrors. The engine idle settled into a steady purr. He let it run. The silence without it felt as though it might be too complete. He stepped down from the cab, the metal of the grab bar beaded with fine moisture against his palm. The air outside was cool but not cold, the fog so dense it seemed to have a faint weight to it. The smell of river water wrapped around everything, layered with the slightly acrid scent of old asphalt and cut grass gone damp. The sound of his boots on the concrete was muffled, each step a subdued thud. He looked around. No other trucks were parked in the designated area. The car lot on the far side held 2 vehicles, a dark sedan and a pale minivan, both sitting in perfect stillness, their windows opaqued by the fog. The building's entrance glowed softly under a buzzing overhang light. Above the door, block letters spelled out, Riverbend Rest Area, in faded white paint. A public service poster flapped gently on a bulletin board, its corners curled, the image too blurred by distance and moisture to make out from where he stood. Inside the glass doors, the lobby was lit with that particular white fluorescence that turned everything slightly flat. From here, the vending machines stood in a neat line, their fronts glowing with the familiar patchwork of snacks and drinks. The place looked like every other modest rest stop he'd ever seen, which somehow made its sudden existence in a place he knew almost more disconcerting. He crossed the lot and pushed open the door. Warm, dry air greeted him, carrying faint traces of coffee, cleaning solution, and the dusty cardboard scent of snack packaging. The hum of refrigeration units filled the space, a low, constant presence. The tile floor was clean but old. The pattern dated a grid of beige squares, some worn just a shade smoother than the others along the main path. On the far wall, a large clock ticked softly, its red second hand making patient laps. The time read 2:47. He glanced automatically at his phone. 3:14. He checked the clock again. Still 2:47, the red hand moving, but the minute hand stubbornly fixed between its marks. From the restroom down the short hallway came the soft echo of dripping water, rhythmic and unhurried. No other sounds of movement. No coughs, no doors, no distant conversations. The vending machines displayed brands that tugged faintly at old memories. Logos in older fonts, packaging he hadn't seen since childhood. He approached one, peering closer. A row of candy bars sat behind the glass, their wrappers pristine, yet the styles several designs out of date. The prices printed on the tiny labels were wrong, too low, by years. His reflection looked back at him from the glass. A tired man in a worn jacket, hair pulled back, expression unreadable in the dim flicker of fluorescence. Behind that faint overlay of himself, the room stretched away, empty. A paper notice was taped to the side of the machine, the ink slightly blurred by time. Please use exact change. Below freezing temperatures may affect operation. In the bottom corner, a date. January 1998. The steady hum of the refrigeration units deepened for a moment, then rose back to its previous pitch, like a long, slow breath. He turned away, the oddness settling into him like another layer of fog rather than an alarm. The restroom was as expected, clean, if slightly worn, with pale tiles and a faint echo. Water ran steadily in one sink, a thin stream. As he reached out to turn it off, another sound slipped in beneath the drip. Voices, low, male, tired, distant, as if coming through a wall. Fog so thick can't see the hood, one said, the words muffled but distinct. Riverbend again, another answered. Swear I passed this place already. Miguel stilled, hand hovering over the faucet. The voices weren't coming from the adjoining room. They seemed to float up from under the floor, or leak in around the edges of the mirror, located nowhere and everywhere at once. A soft chuckle. Coffee still hot though. Time can't be moving if the coffee stays hot. He waited for the sound of footsteps, doors, the small clatter of movement that should follow speech. None came. Only the steady drip, the faint hiss of the vent fan overhead, and his own breathing. After a long moment, the murmur of the unseen conversation drifted away, thinning like smoke. He shut off the faucet. The sudden absence of running water made the room feel momentarily hollow. Back in the lobby, the clock still read 2:47. Its second hand traced the same patient circle, never pulling the minute forward. He stood there, listening to the layered hum, the lights, the machines, something faint and rhythmic behind the walls that might have been plumbing, might have been something older. A bulletin board near the entrance caught his eye, its cork surface cluttered with community notices and faded flyers. Among them, a smaller, yellowed sheet sagged slightly on one thumbtack. Lost. Last contact with driver, Rambler, Joe Kelly. Family seeks information. A grainy photo of a man in a trucker cap smiled out, his CB handle printed beneath. At the bottom, in small type, a date. May 1991. Another notice beneath it. Missing. Daryl. Dusty. Ruiz. Last seen. I-74 corridor, near river. This one from 2003. The names meant nothing to him. Yet the handles sparked something faint. Conversations on the airwaves long ago. Stories traded at tables under buzzing lights. Ramblers and dusties and half-remembered voices, all blending together into a soft background chorus over the years. Outside, the fog pressed itself against the glass like a living thing, blanching the world beyond the sliding doors into formless white. His own truck waited there, a solid, familiar shape. The thought of its warm cab, its known instruments and worn seat, beckoned. As he stepped back into the damp air, the rest area behind him seemed to exhale. The lights overhead buzzed a fraction louder, then settled. The door whispered shut with a sound too soft to echo. He climbed into the cab and paused, fingers resting on the key. His thermos sat in its holder, exactly where he had left it. He picked it up, expecting lukewarm dregs. The metal was warm. When he unscrewed the lid, a thin wisp of steam curled out, delicate and fresh. He checked the dashboard clock. 3:32 a.m. The minutes had marched on, indifferent. The GPS map showed an unbroken line of highway behind him. No marker for a rest area, no icon. Just the river, a pale blue curve beside the road. He pulled back onto the interstate. The fog parted ahead in the same slow way, always reforming, always the same. He accelerated to a cautious speed, letting the white lines slide under the hood in a steady rhythm. A mile marker appeared on the right. 142. Nothing odd about it. Nothing at all. Out of habit, he glanced in the mirror just as the rest area should have disappeared completely from view. Through the rear window in the distance, a shape hovered in the fog, a faint cluster of lights, blurred and soft. For a second he could almost make out the low roofline, the parking lots, the glow of vending machines through glass. Then the shape thinned and folded into the mist, gone as if it had never been. An hour later, the fog began to lift for good, shredding into low, thin strips that clung to the ditches. The dawn came on pale and quiet, and the river showed itself at last, broad and unremarkable, sliding past a landscape that looked entirely ordinary. In years to come, other drivers would mention, in low-voiced conversations over gas station coffee, a strange little rest area by the river that never seemed to be on any map. Some described old machines and older clocks. Some spoke of hearing their own words repeated back to them, years later, by voices they'd never met. No one could agree exactly where it sat. Only that, sometimes, when the fog was thick and the night long enough, the highway seemed to offer a place to stop where time folded gently and did not always move in a straight line. Story number 4. By the time Jenna reached the long slope where the highway dipped between low, rolling hills, the world had been reduced to lines and light. There was the pale, unbroken ribbon of fog, gathered like low smoke along the asphalt. There were the solid white stripes that rose from it, briefly sharp in the glow of her headlights before sliding away beneath the hood. And there were the quiet amber lamps of her instrument panel, casting a soft wash over her hands where they curled around the wheel. The GPS map showed nothing complicated ahead, just a straight stretch of interstate, a mild grade, then another 40 miles of flatland before the next proper town. Earlier that afternoon, her dispatcher had mentioned something about road work in the area. A casual note slipped between route updates and delivery times. Construction around 98, he'd said. Might still be going after dark. Single lane, follow the pilot car if they've got one. At the time, she had pictured cones, bright work lights, the usual late-night choreography of machinery and reflective vests. But now, as the fog thickened until the roadside vanished and the distance seemed to draw in close, the idea felt almost abstract, like something from another day. A rectangular sign appeared in the murk ahead, its edges blurred, words soft with moisture until she was nearly upon it. Road. Work ahead. Expect delays. The reflective orange glowed faintly in her beams, then dissolved behind her. She checked the dashboard clock. 1:23 a.m. A reasonable hour for crews to be wrapping up, not starting. The fog deepened in a slow, steady gradient, as if someone were dialing it up by hand. The shoulders became indistinct, the faint suggestion of guardrail on her right submerging into the white. Ahead, another sign emerged. Left lane, closed. 2 miles. Her foot eased gently off the accelerator. The engine's note dropped a fraction, settling into a more relaxed hum. Out here, with visibility shrinking to a tunnel, speed wasn't bravery. It was foolishness, and she'd long since learned the difference. A few minutes later, when it felt subjectively like she must have traveled much farther, she reached for the CB out of habit, flicking it on to listen. The channel filled with a low hiss, then a few scattered voices, most distant and indistinct. "Fog's a blanket, I'm telling you. You all in that work zone yet? Heard they started nights again." Static folded over the words, smoothing them into an unintelligible wash. She left the volume low, more for the comfort of another noise than for company. Another sign slid into view. Left lane closed, 1 mile. Speed limit 45. She signaled and merged right, though there was no visible traffic to accommodate. The highway felt abandoned, a private road carved through milk. Her mirrors reflected nothing but the soft bloom of her own running lights in the mist. Soon the first orange barrels appeared, standing in a neat line along the faded white stripes of the left lane, each one caught and released by her headlights in turn. Beyond them, the fog thickened into what looked like a sheer wall. The sense of the other half of the highway, usually so strong, faded until she felt, irrationally, as if only this narrow corridor existed at all. Ahead, an arrow board glowed, its amber lights pulsing in a constant pattern, directing her to merge right though she was already there. Beneath it, another sign, 1 lane road ahead. Pilot car. "Follow me." She frowned, scanning the road. No pilot car idled at the transition point, no hazard lights blinking, no work vehicle parked askew on the shoulder. The arrow board clicked and flashed on, indifferent. The convoy of barrels flowed by her right door now, evenly spaced, gleaming dully. The world outside her windows reduced to that single, slowly shifting row and the strip of road ahead. Her speed dropped to the posted 45. The lane narrowed, pressed on her left by a temporary concrete barrier whose upper edge rose and fell in the fog like the top of a wave. On the right, the shoulder was something she inferred more than saw. The white line trailed ahead, disappearing into the diffuse glow. In the cab, the soft rattles and ticks of the loaded trailer behind seemed louder, made intimate by the absence of any other sound. Her breathing found the rhythm of her wipers. Sweep, click, pause. Sweep, click, pause. Then, faintly, she saw it. A pair of taillights far ahead, twin red points hovering in the fog. They bobbed slightly with the motion of the road, neither approaching nor receding, fixed at a careful, unchanging distance. Relief loosened some small knot in her chest. The pilot car, then, or another truck threading the same narrowed path, unknowingly setting her pace. The red lights glowed deeper for a moment, as their owner tapped the brakes, then steadied into a soft, constant burn. She adjusted her speed to match, letting the sense of another vehicle's presence pull her attention forward. Minutes seemed to stretch. The barriers on her left remained, their concrete faces slick with condensation. The barrels on her right paraded by in endless procession. Every few hundred yards, signs appeared out of the mist, all familiar variations on the same theme. Work zone fines doubled. Lanes shift ahead. Be prepared to stop. But they never shifted. The lane remained narrow, constant, as if the configuration were locked in place. Her dashboard clock clicked over. 1:39 a.m. The CB crackled softly. "What mile you at now?" a voice asked, thin but discernible. "Somewhere in that zone still," another answered, older, its vowels rounded by a different decade. "Barrels for days. Keep thinking I'll hit the end, but it just stretches. Copy that. Watch for the wet concrete. They poured it too close last time." She glanced at her GPS. The little icon of her rig crept along the purple line. No roadwork was indicated, no changes in traffic conditions, no warnings. Just a small number in the corner, mile 98. Out the windshield, the taillights remained, always the same careful distance ahead. Once, through a brief thinning in the fog, she glimpsed more. The faint outline of a boxy rear door, the suggestion of old-style mud flaps. The vehicle seemed older than the ones she usually shared the road with, its proportions a little different. like the silhouette of a long-retired model. The fog closed in again, swallowing everything but those two red points. Jenna checked her fuel as a matter of routine. The needle sat comfortably above the line she mentally marked as, "Pay attention." She checked the time again, 1:52 a.m. The sensation came to her gradually, like noticing a hum you've been hearing all along. The impression that she'd been moving through this single-lane gauntlet for far too long. By her speed and the time since the first signs, she should have cleared a modest work zone twice over. Yet the barrier still hugged her left mirror. The barrel still guarded her right. The sign still promised shifting lanes and flaggers, and an end that never materialized. Ahead, the tail lights brightened as the unseen driver tapped the brakes again, then dimmed. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a second set, overlapping, as if two vehicles occupied almost the same space. But when she blinked, the illusion dissolved. The CB hissed. Another old tinged voice murmured through. "Crew says rain's coming. Gotta get this pour finished before morning. Keep 'em slow through 98, you hear? Last thing we need's another mess on this stretch." A work crew, she thought. In weather like this? She strained to see any sign of them. Usually, even in fog, floodlights announced active work from a mile away. Bright islands of white in the darkness, machinery silhouettes, the sharp clang and whir of nighttime labor. Here, there was nothing. No glare, no clang, no high-pitched whine of saws on concrete. Only the hum of her own engine and the muffled whisper of tires on damp pavement. Her fingers shifted slightly on the steering wheel. The cab felt smaller, cozier, and more closely containing, as if the world outside had shrunk to match the volume of air around her. At last, up ahead, a new sign surfaced. End road work. The words shone up at her in simple black on white, edges clean, reflective backing bright. The taillights beyond it flickered, then vanished, as if the vehicle had simply stepped sideways out of existence. Her shoulders eased in anticipation. The lane would broaden, the barriers would fall away. The highway would unfurl into its familiar width. She passed the sign. Nothing changed. The concrete wall on her left continued unbroken, its damp top edge an uninterrupted line. The row of barrels marched on to her right. The lane remained a careful narrow corridor hemmed in on both sides. She shifted slightly in her seat, a small adjustment against a pressure she couldn't name. The E-end road work sign receded in her mirror, half swallowed by the fog, then gone. The dashboard clock read 2:07 a.m. On the CB, someone laughed softly, the sound worn and a little tired. "Thought we were clear back there," a voice said. "Guess not. You've been at 98 a while, man," another replied. Long while. Her eyes flicked from mirror to windshield. The road offered her the same slender view. White line, barrels, fog. No intersections, no ramps. No evidence that anything existed beyond the concrete walls. She glanced once sharply at the fuel gauge. The needle had not moved. She had been idling through at low speed, yes, but not so slowly, not so long, that the gauge should read exactly where it had when she'd first seen the road work ahead sign. The unwavering position registered in her gut as something slightly off, like a note held too steady for too long. Ahead, through the mist, a glow deepened. Not headlights, not the harsh white of work lamps. This was warmer, a wash of amber and soft yellow that seemed to soak the fog rather than pierce it. The sort of light cast by sodium lamps and portable generators. She rolled toward it, heart ticking a fraction faster. Shapes emerged, slowly, like figures stepping out of a dream. Tall tripods of lights stood along the median, their fixtures tilted down toward nothing. No torn-up pavement, no machinery. Their bulbs shone with a steady hum, illuminating a perfectly intact stretch of road. Between them, spectral outlines shifted, the hint of reflective vests, the arc of an upraised arm, the ghosted form of a hard hat catching the light. The movements were muted, slowed, as if seen through thick glass or a screen at low frame rate. As Jenna passed, the figures did not sharpen. Her eyes seemed unable to bring them into full focus. A man bent over a clipboard, his edges soft as chalk. Two silhouettes stood near the barrier, one gesturing, the other nodding, mouths moving without sound. She felt, more than saw, several heads turn in her direction, not with urgency, not with any clear recognition, just a slow tracking, the way you might watch a familiar train passing a platform you've stood on countless times. For a moment, the cab felt oddly crowded, as if her truck had intruded on a scene that had been playing uninterrupted for years without need of any audience. Then the glow faded behind her. The fog closed in. The lane remained the same. Her hand, almost of its own accord, moved to the CB mic. She pressed the button lightly, voice low. "Anyone else in that work zone at 98 tonight?" Silence swelled in response, broken only by distant static. At last, a single reply filtered through, thin but clear, as if coming from much farther away than the channel number suggested. "Been in it a long time, driver," the voice said. "Longer than I can tell you. Just keep your wheels straight and don't stop in the fog. It's easier to stay moving." She waited for a handle, a name, anything. The carrier wave hissed softly, then dropped. No more words. Minutes later, though, it felt like much more. The concrete barrier on her left stepped back into the mist. The barrels on her right dwindled. The white line widened into full shoulder. Another end road work sign appeared, this one accompanied by a return to normal speed marker. The world beyond her headlights began to hint again at its ordinary shape. A dark tree line, a suggestion of rise and fall in the land. She checked the clock. 2:11 a.m. 4 minutes since the last end road work sign. 4 minutes that had felt like something else entirely. The green mile marker on her right read 101. The GPS, when she glanced at it, showed no deviation, no marked work zone, no recorded delay. Behind her, when she took one last look in the mirror, there was only an ordinary stretch of fog-softened interstate, twin lanes running side by side into the white. Later that week, parked at a small truck stop over coffee, she mentioned the endless construction between 98 and 100 to 1. The other drivers frowned, more puzzled than skeptical. "State pulled that project years ago," one said, stirring sugar into his cup. "They shut it down after an accident. Whole crew never came home, haven't put a night shift in there since." He shook his head, glancing toward the fog-softened windows as if he could see the mile markers from where he sat. "Still," he added almost as an afterthought, "I've heard folks say they see barrels out there sometimes. Signs. Like the road's remembering. Or maybe somebody's still trying to finish what they started." On later trips, whenever the fog sank low over that familiar valley and the orange glimmer of a work zone flickered faintly in the distance, Jenna found herself easing off the brake throttle just a little, eyes searching the mist for a pair of steady red taillights that always seemed to hover just out of reach. And each time she passed mile 98, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that on some other night, in some other slice of time, the same stretch of road was still narrowed between concrete and barrels, a line of unseen workers moving slowly in the glow of halogen lamps, forever waiting for dawn that never quite finished arriving. Story number 5. The fog came in low over the prairie, hugging the flat land as if it belonged there. It blurred the line where the fields ended and the sky began, softening the edges of windbreaks and fence posts until they were nothing more than gray smudges in the dark. Eli had been watching it build in his mirrors for an hour, a white tide slowly swallowing the back half of the world. Now it had caught him, folding around the cab in slow, deliberate swirls that turned his headlights into a pair of soft halos. The interstate here ran straight as a plumb line, east and west, without much argument. In daylight, the view went on for miles in every direction: corn in season, bare dirt in winter, the occasional cluster of grain silos like small concrete cities on the horizon. Tonight, it all lay under a quiet shroud. The truck's interior was a cocoon of LED glow and familiar sounds. The constant drone of the engine, the subtle buzz of the CB on low, the faint hiss of air through vents. His thermos sat half empty in the cup holder, breath of coffee still curling from the mouth when he tipped it. Out ahead, a green sign eased through the fog, reflective paint catching and briefly intensifying the light. Way station, 2 miles. Trucks prepare to stop. Eli squinted slightly. That couldn't be right. The way station on this stretch, the little cinder block building just off the shoulder, had been closed for years. He'd watched it sit dark and unused through at least 4 harvests. Its overhead sign permanently blank, the scale deck covered in a thin coat of dust and weeds. He eased off the accelerator a little anyway, habit nudging him more than belief. Regulations had a way of changing when a person wasn't looking. Maybe the state had finally decided to reopen it. 2 miles of fog-thick asphalt slid beneath his tires. Another sign appeared. Way station. 1 mile. Open when flashing. A steel gantry loomed through the mist just past it. Empty. No lights. No electronic message board. The highway on either side of him remained deserted and soft-edged. He glanced down at his GPS. No icon for a station blinked along his route. The map showed only the highway as a purple line and the vague squares and rectangles of surrounding farmland. Up ahead, through a denser patch of fog, a cluster of lights emerged. A low building, squared off and practical, and beside it the dull gleam of a long-scale deck parallel to the road. Above the exit ramp, a rectangular board glowed. Way station open. The words burned in steady green, bright in the murk. Eli's fingers tightened on the wheel. The feeling that threaded through him wasn't fear, exactly. More a quiet misgiving, a sense that the world had subtly misfiled a piece of itself. Still, the sign said open. The law, if anyone was watching, would say stop. He signaled and guided the rig onto the ramp. The pavement here had a slightly different tone, the hum under his tires changing key. The fog wrapped closer, nudging against his windows like slow water. Sodium lamps cast pools of yellowish light onto the concrete apron around the station, each circle reaching only so far before the gray swallowed it. He rolled slowly onto the scale deck, the rough surface vibrating faintly through the chassis. A simple red light above the office window blinked to green. He brought the truck to a stop, set the brake, and watched the digital numbers on the outside display. They flickered, then steadied at a weight that was exactly right for his load. No drift, no hesitation. Inside the small office, fluorescent tubes hummed. The single window was dark from his vantage. The interior, a pale blur beyond the reflection of his own headlights. He waited for someone to step into view. A silhouette, the tap of a clipboard against glass. Nothing moved. The speaker mounted on a steel post beside his driver's window crackled softly, followed by a voice that sounded thin and slightly metallic, as if it had traveled a long way through old wiring. "Evening, driver. Bring it on inside with your paperwork." The accent was local, vowels flattened by the prairie. Calm, unhurried. Eli scanned the dark window one more time, then sighed and cracked his door. The damp air met him with a faint chill, bringing the smell of wet gravel and distant soil. The fog beaded on his jacket as he stepped down, tiny droplets collecting along the seams. The lot was empty. No other trucks idled in the marked spaces. No inspectors stood outside smoking or chatting. The building crouched alone beside the scale, a single-story rectangle of pale brick with a flat roof and a short set of steps up to the entrance. As he approached, the details resolved. The glass in the door was slightly rippled, the kind made before anyone thought to demand perfection. A paper hours sign was taped crookedly to its lower corner. Through the glass, the interior glowed with a tired fluorescent light. He pushed the door open. A small bell above jingled with a bright, old-fashioned sound that felt out of place in the sterile little room. Inside, the air was warm and stale, carrying the ghosts of coffee, ink, and 100 conversations layered on top of one another. A counter ran along the wall facing the scale window, cluttered with pens on chains, stacks of forms, a jar of hard candies in old red and gold wrappers. A bulletin board sagged under the weight of notices and memos, their edges curled. Behind the counter sat an empty chair. Behind that, a metal desk with an old rotary phone on one corner and a green-shaded lamp that wasn't turned on. A wall clock ticked softly above, its second hand moving with tiny, decisive jumps. The digital numbers on the scale repeater inside matched those outside, glowing green on black. Paperwork on the counter. The same voice said. Closer now, but still disembodied. Logbook open to today. Eli laid his binder down, fingers brushing a faint groove worn into the laminate by countless others doing the same. He flipped to his current page, the neat lines of ink steady under his calloused thumb. The pen on its chain swung gently. He glanced up. No one stood on the other side of the counter. No doorway stood open into some back room where an inspector might be seated. Only a closed door, its paint chipped slightly near the knob. Above the counter, near the speaker grill, a small black and white photograph was tacked to the wall. It showed a much younger version of the same way station, a fresh coat of paint on its bricks, a proud new sign out front. 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder before it, dressed in agency jackets, smiling awkwardly at the camera. The voice came again, calm and methodical. Tractor plate? He gave the number, hearing his own words sound overly loud in the small room. Company? He answered. There was a tiny pause, the sort that might accompany a quick check against a list. The voice murmured, thoughtful. Didn't know they were still running trucks out of that yard. They are, Eli said. Very much. Another pause. A rustle, as if of paper somewhere he couldn't see. On the bulletin board, among inspection posters and emergency contact lists, a narrow strip of yellowed newsprint hung crookedly. Local inspector among those lost in structure fire. The headline read in tiny, smudged type. The date beneath it was nearly illegible. He found his eyes drawn, instead, to a laminated sheet pinned beside it. List of citations, major violations. Beneath the title ran a column of names and dates in small, block letters. Some of the names were familiar, not personally, but familiar in the way of truck stop stories and CB chatter. Handles turned into first names over cups of coffee. Men and women who'd timed out permanently, according to late-night rumor. A few were said to have run off the road in winter storms. One, he recalled, was spoken of in the past tense without anyone ever quite saying why. Besides several names, a thin line of red ink had been drawn through. Others remained clean. Weight looks good, the unseen inspector said. Axles are in line. You keeping your hours honest tonight? Yes, sir, Eli replied, more out of reflex than anything else. Running legal. The wall clock showed 11:04. His watch read 1:49. He cleared his throat. You, need anything else? A soft exhale crackled over the speaker. Almost, but not quite a sigh. No, driver, you're fine. Just keep it steady in that fog. A beat. Lot of folks get turned around when it rolls in like this. Easy to miss a sign when you can't see past your own hood. Eli nodded, though there was no one to see it. He gathered his logbook, the pen's chain clicking faintly against the counter as it swung back. As he turned to go, something on the desk behind the empty chair caught his eye. An open ledger, thick and old-fashioned, its pages filled with neat handwriting in blue ink. The top line on the open page bore today's date. Someone had written his name there, in letters that matched none of the signatures he knew. The time beside it read 11:02. In the margin, a quick note. Night fog clear. He blinked. When he looked again, the ledger lay closed. Outside, the bell jingled once more as the door swung shut behind him. The fog greeted him like an old friend, damp fingers brushing his face. His truck sat just where he had left it, outlined in the spill of the yard lights, paint filmed in a thin sheen of moisture. As he climbed back into the cab, he glanced once more at the low brick building. Through the window, the interior glowed the same, blank and still. No shadow moved behind the glass. He merged back onto the interstate, the ramp short and quickly eaten by fog. In his mirror, the way station remained visible for a few seconds as a pale box of light then folded into the white like everything else. Emile Marker slid past 212. He checked his log. The stop at the station, start to finish, had taken 9 minutes. The clock on his dash agreed, the minutes having ticked forward sensibly. Later that week, at a small diner where the coffee was strong and the talk was easy, he mentioned the reopened station at 212 inches passing. A gray-bearded driver at the next table paused mid-sip. "That place," the older man said slowly, "that station burned out 20 years ago. Faulty heater, they said. Took the whole office with it. They never rebuilt. Just left the pad and the deck to sit." Eli frowned, picturing the humming fluorescence, the soft tick of the wall clock, the jar of candies on the counter. Lights were on, he said. Scale was live. The older driver shrugged, gaze drifting to the fog-softened parking lot beyond the diner's windows. "Funny thing about that stretch," he murmured. "When the fog gets thick enough, some folks say the state gets its station back for a while. Old inspector's still in there, checking weights, writing names in his book. Never heard of him hassling anyone, though. He just likes to know who's passing through." On future trips, whenever fog lay low over the prairie and the green sign for the way station loomed out of the mist, Eli found his foot ease off the throttle just a fraction. Sometimes the overhead board was dark, the station nothing more than a ghostly square lost beyond the shoulder. Other nights, when the fog was deeper and the world felt narrower, a faint green glow would burn above the ramp, and the word "open" would hover there, waiting. Story number 6. The bridge rose out of the marshland like a long, pale spine, its concrete arches vanishing quickly into the low, rolling fog. From Roy's cab, it looked less like a man-made structure and more like some old bone uncovered by the tide. The highway lay delicately along its length. He had timed it wrong, and he knew it. The coastal plain always bred fog after a warm day, especially where the road skimmed just above the water and reeds. Locals joked that the causeway had its own weather, and it never checked the forecast. Tonight the mist had waited until he was committed no exits between here and the mainland, then drifted in with patient certainty. The approach ramp stretched ahead, lights along the guardrail glowing as dull orbs in the thickening white. The night behind him was simply dark. The night in front was something else entirely, made of texture and swirls and soft movement. He eased off the throttle as the first tendrils reached his bumper. The engine's note dropped to a calm, steady drone. The tires thumped over the expansion joints, each soft rhythm a reminder of distance. 1, 2, 3. Then the world narrowed. Fog slipped over the hood, climbed the windshield, and settled there, turning his high beams into 2 pale smudges. He clicked them off, letting the low beams carve a smaller, clearer tunnel through the murk. Water smell crept into the cab, brackish and cool, edged with the faint sweetness of mud and crushed reeds. On either side of the bridge, where daylight would have shown him flat stretches of marsh and water shot through with channels, there was nothing now but formless white. The guardrails simply vanished a few feet from his doors. It felt, in a way, as if the truck was riding on its own beam of light across nothingness. Roy flipped the radio off. The music, cheerful and tinny, felt wrong in the soft, cocooned quiet. The truck's own sounds filled the space instead. The purr of the engine, the low whistle of air past the mirrors, the rhythmic squeak of the wiper arm when he gave the windshield an unnecessary swipe. Up ahead, a glowing rectangle emerged from the mist, letters smudged, then clarifying. Fog ahead. Use low beams. Watch speed. He huffed a quiet breath. The sign was behind on the news. The digital display flickered. For a moment the letters blurred into nonsense, then reformed into something new. Accident ahead. Expect delays. Roy's eyes narrowed. His boot lifted a little, letting the speed bleed further off. His mirrors showed only vague light, and the ghost of his own trailer edges. No headlights, front or back. No reflection of hazard flashers pulsing in the fog. He reached instinctively for the CB mic, then stopped halfway. The unit was off. He hadn't bothered with chatter tonight. Still, as his fingers brushed the plastic, the speaker crackled. "Bridge is slicking up, you all watch it." A man's voice, faint, threaded with the soft hiss of static. Roy froze, hand hovering. The CB's power light remained dark. Another voice bled through, rougher, sounding closer. "Seeing nothing but white out here, man. Where'd the lanes even go?" The hair along his forearms prickled under his flannel sleeves. The cab was sealed against the damp, vents humming low, yet the voices felt as though they were seeping in with the fog, not through wires. He thumbed the power on. The display blinked to life, glowing amber. Channel 19. The speaker hissed, emptier now that the unit was actually receiving. "Anybody got a visual on that jackknife?" a third voice asked, older, worn thin. "Company blue tractor, white trailer, thinking he's sideways just past the second span." Roy's chest tightened, not with fear but with an old dull recognition. Company blue, white trailer. The colors of the outfit he'd started with, long before the one he drove for now. 20-odd years gone, logo changed twice since. He reached the first rise of the bridge. The grade was barely there, but in the fog it felt more pronounced, like he was climbing into the belly of cloud. The water smell deepened. The hum of his tires changed over the joints. Each thump echoed up through the seat. The sign had said accident ahead. His hazard flashers stayed off. He wasn't slowing that much, but his gaze sharpened, searching the pale corridor for the first hint of trouble. Skewed headlights, a glow of flashers around a curve. Any break in the pattern of white lines that would warn him of something out of place. Nothing. Just the relentless procession of seams beneath him. The gray smear of road. The soft, glowing fog. "Roy, where you sitting out there?" came another voice from the CB, clearer now, too familiar. Younger, easy. "You past the middle yet, or you still crawling, old man?" He almost answered before sense caught him. The name, the tone, both pulled from a drawer long closed. He realized with a peculiar chill that he was listening to his own voice, 10, maybe 15 years younger. The cadence was unmistakable once he heard it. The way he leaned on certain words, the small chuckle at the end of a sentence that wasn't quite a laugh. He gripped the wheel more tightly, joints clicking softly in his fingers. The fog outside seemed to lean closer, pressing its face to the glass. Memory rose, unbidden. Another night on this same stretch, different truck, same fog. The radio alive then, a loose convoy talking each other over the water. Someone ahead had hit their brakes too late. Someone behind had followed too close. He'd heard the squeal of tires, the crunching slide of metal on concrete, only through the speaker. By the time he'd reached the site, crawling, there had been nothing left but skewed rigs and a line of tail lights vanishing into white. The wreck itself hidden, swallowed in shields of mist and flashing red and blue. He had rolled past, heart in his throat, hands locked in a white grip, grateful guiltily, fiercely that the chaos had settled just out of his reach. Now, the voices from that night seemed to be leaking back into his cab, uninvited. "I'm coming up on the second span," the younger version of him said. "Don't see nothing yet. Keep it slow, Roy." The older voice replied, "They're saying he blocked it sideways. No room for error." Roy reached the gentle center hump of the bridge. Both sides dropped away into whiteness. The feeling of crossing over open air intensified. He glanced at his instruments. Speed steady. Oil good. Temperature normal. The lights on the dash glowed steady and reassuring. Up ahead, something flickered in the fog. Not steady like tail lights. A rhythmic pulse. On, off. On, off. Hazard flashers, distant and dulled by the thickness of the air. His mouth went dry. The pulses came from somewhere around a slight curve in the bridge, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. In the hazy depth, he thought he saw the vague shape of a trailer, sitting crosswise, its corners vague, blocking the far lane and overlapping part of his. He eased off the accelerator until his foot just rested on it. The truck coasted, weight pressing down, engine muttering a low, controlled complaint as he feathered the brake. Every movement was careful, precise. Years behind the wheel had burned certain reflexes into him, and they rose now like old friends. The hazard lights burned brighter, then dimmer, swallowed briefly as the fog thickened between him and them. The shape of the trailer wavered, like a reflection in disturbed water. "There he is," Past Roy's voice murmured in his cab, quieter, as if he were speaking while squinting through glass. "Company blue, just like they said. Looks bad. Real bad." Roy's throat worked. He could almost see his younger self's hands, years ago, doing exactly what his were doing now, making the same small corrections, the same measurements of distance and weight and grip. He crept closer. The fog thinned in a slow breath. and for a moment he saw the scene more clearly. A tractor at an angle, cab faced toward the guardrail, trailer swept diagonally across the lanes. The company logo, his old company, in its old colors floated on the trailer's side, dim but unmistakable. The hazard flashers pulsed, washing the fog bank in weak orange. Then, between one thump of the expansion joints and the next, the entire image folded. There was no other truck, no flashers. The lanes lay empty, pale stripes unbroken, reaching ahead into the fog. Roy's heart knocked once, hard. Instinctively, he scanned for any remaining trace, a skid mark, debris, shadow. The bridge offered only damp concrete, faintly shining in his beams. The CB crackled. "He's through," the older voice said softly with audible relief. Roy cleared it. "Rest of you ease it down and follow suit." Younger Roy chuckled, small and shaky. "Told you I'd make it. You boys worry too much." The present Roy let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, air leaving him in a slow, controlled stream. His hands were steady on the wheel now. The truck moved through the empty space where the ghost of another truck had just stood, his cab filling the absence like a key sliding home. The voices on the CB faded, replaced by a low sea of static that ebbed and flowed with the road's imperceptible curves. Outside, the fog began very gradually to thin. Shapes suggested themselves at the edges of his vision. The darker smudge of marsh grass, the faint, soft-wedged glimmer of water channels to either side. He checked his dash clock. 2:04 a.m. The crossing had taken him less time than his nerves felt it should, yet more than the bridge's length would suggest. Time, it seemed, had stretched and folded with the fog. At last the far shore appeared, first as a thicker band of darkness, then as a solid line. The causeway ramped down onto more ordinary asphalt, the comforting wideness of mainland highway sliding into place beneath his wheels. The fog loosened its grasp, breaking into tatters that drifted in the wake of his trailer. Just beyond the end of the bridge, a small green sign stood by the shoulder. He had seen it before, but tonight its white letters seemed clearer. Caution, Fogaria, in memory of all. Lost here, a bouquet of plastic flowers leaned against its post, their colors muted in the thin mist. Roy's gaze flicked to the mirror, almost against his will. For a heartbeat, the bridge behind him was a ghostly span hanging in midair, its arcs and rails fading quickly into cloud. Just at the crest of its rise, half hidden by the whiteness, a pair of faint orange blinks pulsed once, twice, then nothing. Just the soft glow of his own clearance lights, reflected back at him from the mist. He clicked the radio off again. The cab grew quieter, more intimate. The feel of the steering wheel under his palms, the grain of the plastic, the slight vibration, grounded him in the present. Up ahead, the land stretched out flat and solid, fields sleeping under a thinning veil. The fog would follow him a while, he knew, pooling in low places, rising in shallow bowls along the way. But the bridge, with its old voices and vanishing hazards, was behind him now, folded back into whatever thin place it had opened. Still, on nights when he approached that causeway and saw the first low ribbons of mist forming over the marsh, he would sometimes find his hand drifting to the CB out of habit, fingers brushing the mic, as if expecting to hear a younger version of himself laughing somewhere in the static. And each time he crossed, if the fog was thick enough and the air still enough, he would see, just for a moment, the digital sign at the foot of the bridge flicker through a message not on any maintenance schedule. Accident ahead. Expect delays. Before it steadied into something more ordinary and the road, like time, pretended to move only forward. Story number 7. By the time Lila crossed the state line, the night had turned into one long, quiet hallway. The highway ran straight through pine forest, 2 dark walls flanking her, the sky overhead a low ceiling of cloud. Fog had been gathering in the low spots for miles, but now it rose higher, a soft, pale band that turned the base of every tree into a shadow with no roots. Her truck's cab felt like a small, moving room, dash lights dimmed to a gentle glow, the hum of the engine steady and familiar under her feet. The world beyond the windshield had shrunk to the twin beams of her low headlights and the wet gleam of the painted lines. Everything else was suggestion. She'd been scanning stations for something to keep her company. The regular playlists felt too bright tonight, their tempo jarring against the slow pulse of fog and forest. Talk radio was worse. Too sharp, too awake. Her finger nudged the tuning button, letting bits of sound drift through, a burst of static, a few notes of guitar, the cadence of an advertisement half heard, then gone. The scan stopped of its own accord. A voice, warm and low, slid into the cab as if it had been there all along. And for those of you out on the road between mile 140 and 190, take it easy through that ground mist. It's thicker than it looks, and you're more tired than you think. Lila's hand froze on the dial. She flicked a quick glance at the green marker flashing past on her right. 163. Her thumb hovered over the button to change the station, but the voice had a softness that held her in place. Not cheerful, not saccharine, just steady, like someone sitting across from you at a table, talking in a tone meant only for the two of you. Low guitar notes threaded under the words, a lazy, wistful pattern. No commercials cut in, no station jingle announced itself. The voice continued. If you're riding solo tonight, and most of you are, now's a good moment to roll your shoulders, unclench that jaw, and notice if you've been holding your breath at every bend. A subtle smile lived at the edge of the words. The trees aren't going anywhere. Neither are you if you keep it between the lines. Beyond the glass, the forest stood in silent ranks, trunks vanishing into fog at their bases. The white line along the right shoulder gleamed dully, beaded with moisture. Her grip on the wheel was, she realized, tighter than it needed to be. She exhaled slowly, shoulders easing a fraction. Static crackled lightly, like logs settling in a fire. Then the voice said more quietly, "We've got a driver out there in a silver rig with a teal stripe, pulling a refrigerated box. You just crossed into Eastern, and you've been sipping coffee that went lukewarm 20 miles back. You're listening a little closer now. That's good." Lila's heart gave a small, startled jump. The description fit her truck exactly, down to the teal stripe her company insisted on. She looked automatically to her rear view, as if the station might somehow be riding in her blind spot. The mirror showed only the pale smear of fog catching her clearance lights, and far behind, nothing at all. She reached for the knob. Curiosity outpaced her unease. "What station is this?" she asked aloud, more to the empty cab than to anyone listening. The voice, as if amused, carried on. "You don't have to talk back. We know some of you do anyway." A soft chuckle, not unkind. "You can call this whatever you like. Old Mile Radio, Night Road, doesn't much matter. We're here when the other stations fade out and the trees get closer and the fog comes up off the ditches." A sign loomed through the mist. Next services 38 miles. Her fuel was fine. Her logbook was fine. She should have felt fine. Yet the presence of that calm voice nestled itself somewhere between comfort and something she didn't quite want to name. "And for the rest of you," the host continued, "we've got a song coming up that some of you remember from that first long haul you swore you'd never repeat." The quiet clink of something on a desk, like a tape case being moved. "But before we do, watch that curve coming up past the low bridge. It's sharper than the map makes it look, and it's easy to drift wide when the fog plays tricks with the guardrail." Lila frowned. As far as she knew, this stretch ran straight for 20 miles. No bridge, no curve. Still, the way he said it specific, unhurried, lodged in her mind. Her hands adjusted on the wheel without conscious decision, anticipation spreading through her like the ripple of a muscle before a step. The white line ahead veered, just slightly, to the right. The road bent more than it had any business doing, descending a modest pitch that the flat elevation profile on her GPS did not show. Stone walls rose on either side, flanking the narrow overpass ahead, its underside a dark smudge against the fog. She eased down a little, just enough to settle the rig. The curve tightened in the last seconds before the bridge, the guardrail on her right sneaking closer. For an instant, the space felt narrower than it should. Trailer, wall, drop, then she was through. The back tires humming over joins in the pavement, the deck leveling out. Her eyes flicked to the screen on her dash. The map remained indifferent, the line of her route perfectly straight. No depiction of a bend, no low bridge icon. The elevation graph pulsed as a flat bar. The song started. Something old, soft, with a slow drum beat, and a voice that sounded like a late summer evening. It filled the cab warmly, riding on top of the engine's low murmur. She listened, but beneath the music, she became aware of something else on the frequency. Very faint, threaded under the guitar, and bass the almost imperceptible murmur of other voices, like a crowd heard through a wall. Fragments rose and fell. 16 hours, I know, but the dispatcher, fogs like soup, I swear. You hear that station last week? They weren't distinct enough to follow. Just hints of other drivers, other nights, layered into the static like distant stars in cloud. When the song faded, the host's voice returned, a touch more serious. Got a call earlier from a driver headed west near the same run you're on now, he said. He was talking about chasing a set of taillights that never seemed to get closer. Said no matter how long he followed, the distance stayed the same. Lila's gaze sharpened on the road ahead. There's a trick the night plays out here, the host continued. Fog. Fatigue, you know how it goes. You can latch onto anything that looks like company, but if you've been following the same glow for longer than you should, and your clock doesn't match your memory, that's when you ease off the pedal. As if on cue, a faint red glow appeared far ahead in her lane. A pair of taillights, small against the gray, bobbing with the unseen rise and fall of the road. She checked the time. 2:19 a.m. She glanced at her odometer, mentally measured the distance since the last marker. The tail lights held steady, neither growing nor diminishing, pinned in place at a fixed point in her view like something drawn on glass. Leave a little space for yourself, the voice said softly. You don't know how long whoever you're watching has been out there, or if they're still where you think they are. She let her foot ease up, a subtle drop in speed. The engine's tone shifted down, the rig's weight settling in a way that felt grounded. The taillights ahead remained precisely where they'd been. Fog curled in the beams of her headlights, slow and deliberate. Pine trunks rose and fell at the edge of her vision. Somewhere overhead, unseen, an owl called once, the sound thin and distant. After a time minutes that felt longer, the red dots flickered, like a reflection shivered by disturbed water, and were gone. No exit ramp, no obvious shoulder pull-off, just empty road. The host didn't remark on it. Instead, his tone lightened fractionally. Now we're hearing from a driver who says he's been trying to turn that rig around for longer than a logbook would allow. Stuck at a crossroads, you might say. If you're at mile 181 right now, do him a favor and don't take that enticing little detour with the bright diner sign. It's not there in the morning. Lila huffed out a short breath that was almost a laugh. The image was absurd, and yet she watched the markers. 170, 171, 172. The miles ticked off in correct order, white numbers on green posts beating the roadside. At 181 there was no diner sign. Just a rest area symbol, its icon of a bench and a tree barely visible through the fog. She let it pass, staying on the main line. Some stubborn part of her wanted to see if anything unexpected would shine out of the gray, but the stronger part preferred the smooth continuity of the interstate under her wheels. The trees eventually fell back. The fog thinned, not all at once but in gentle degrees, like a curtain being lifted in sections. The sky behind the clouds hinted at a lighter shade of black toward the east. The air in the cab felt clearer, the edges of her fatigue more defined and workable. The host's voice softened, as if drawing slightly away. Looks like some of you are about to outrun the fog, he said. We'll be fading to static for you soon. Before we do, check your mirrors. You made it through another stretch that looks shorter on the map than it feels at 3 in the morning. That counts for something. She found herself obeying. The mirror showed the pale trail of her own lights marking the road behind, fog folding gently back over it. No taillights followed. No shapes lurked at the tree line. And one last thing for the driver in the silver truck with the teal stripe, the voice added. You did well not taking that shoulder when you felt like pulling over in the thick of it. There's a little turnout in 3 miles with a broken lamp and a picnic table that's seen better days. You'll sleep better there. Her hands still. A faint sign appeared just where he said it would, its reflective surface dim. Scenic aria. 3 miles. She hadn't planned to stop. She wasn't quite at her limit. But the idea of a small, overlooked pull-off just beyond the worst of the fog appealed. A place away from the hypnotic stripe, from the sensation of driving through someone else's whispers. "Drive safe," the host said quietly. "We'll be here when the road bends and the world gets small again." Static surged, gentle and crackling. When it cleared, another station had taken its place. A pop song, bright and insistent. Someone laughing over an advertisement. Ordinary radio, anonymous and busy. Lila let it play for a moment, then turned the volume down to a background murmur. 3 miles later, the promised scenic area emerged. A shallow curve off the highway, an old wooden fence, one crooked lamp that flickered but held. She pulled in, set her brake, and let the engine idle down. The fog here was thinner, a soft halo around the trees instead of a wall. When she stepped out, the air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Crickets, invisible in the dark, had resumed their patient chorus. In the distance, she heard a lone car hiss past on the main line, its sound brief and self-contained. She stood for a moment beside her truck, listening. No radio voices, no hidden warnings, just night, and the quiet tick of cooling metal, and the small, ordinary sounds of a world not entirely swallowed by mist. Later, as she drifted toward sleep in the bunk, she thought about the unnamed station and its calm familiarity with a stretch of road most people would only remember as a blur between towns. She wondered who else had listened over the years, hands tight on wheels, eyes burning, grateful for a voice that knew where the danger spots lay when the fog rose and the world shrank to a tunnel of light. And in the months that followed, whenever she found herself rolling into a pocket of thick weather on a lonely highway, she'd thumb the radio to scan and wait, just a beat longer than usual, to see if that same low voice would slide into the cab again, calling out mile markers and unseen curves for the small fraternity of drivers moving through the narrow corridors of the night. Story number 8. The night highway along the northern coast had a way of changing its face when the fog came in from the sea. In clear weather, the road curved and dipped with a certain friendliness, guardrails catching glints of starlight, the faint glow of distant towns smearing along the horizon. But on nights like this, when the low clouds pressed down and the ocean exhaled a thick, gray breath across the cliffs, the world narrowed to a ribbon of asphalt and the hollow sound of tires on damp pavement. Mark guided his rig along the coastal route with the quiet care born of long habit. The dash lights painted his hands in soft amber where they rested at 10 and 2. The radio was off for once, the usual chatter and music feeling too bright for the softened world outside. Instead, he listened to the engine's low, constant murmur and the faint rattle of something loose in the sleeper behind him. On his right, beyond the guardrail, the land dropped away into fog that glowed faintly in his headlights. Somewhere below, unseen waves moved against unseen rock, their sound swallowed by the insulating mist. To his left, the dark rise of forest climbed toward an equally unseen sky, the first trees only half visible, trunks turning into pale vertical smudges and then nothing. A green sign rose from the white ahead, letters blurred until his lights found them. Tunnel. Yksi mile. Use headlights. Turn off radio. He frowned, the crease between his brows deepening. There was no tunnel on this stretch. He knew this road, the newer coastal bypass that had replaced the old cliffside route years ago. Its engineers had chosen wide cuts and gentle banks over the narrow, stone-lined tunnels of older highways. He had never once passed anything more enclosed than a short underpass. The order to turn off the radio struck him as peculiar, given that he already had. Perhaps some local safety quirk, he thought, but that didn't explain the tunnel itself. The GPS map on his dash showed nothing unusual ahead, just a curved line hugging the coast. No special markers, no gray block indicating a tunnel bore. The elevation profile dipped, then climbed, but not dramatically. The fog thickened in slow, deliberate increments. The guardrail on his right became a suggestion more than a line. The double yellow in the center blurred at the edges, then sharpened again just long enough to slide under his hood and vanish. Another sign loomed up. Tunnel. Urmites miles mile. No stopping. Maintain speed. He checked his speed. A steady 45, cautious but not crawling. The road felt slightly damp beneath the tires. That particular slickness that wasn't quite rain. The smell outside the cab shifted. Too less of salt and pine, more of rock and something cool and mineral, like the air in a deep cellar. He told himself it was just another trick of the weather. Fog changed sound and scent and sense. It wrapped familiar places in strange clothing. Still, as the next curve brought a dark archway into view ahead, a great black mouth cut into the hillside, its outline softened by creeping moss and mist. His fingers tightened a fraction on the wheel. The tunnel entrance rose from the fog with a slow certainty, framed in old, stained concrete. A row of yellow lights glowed along its ceiling just inside, receding into the distance in a soft, hazy line. Above the arch, a metal plaque caught his beams and flashed back a brief, unreadable shine before it passed overhead. The sensation of crossing the threshold was immediate. The sound changed first. The soft rush of air along the cab sides tightened into a muted hush, the engine's voice coming back to him with a hollow, rounded quality. Outside, the fog thinned, replaced by the close, motionless atmosphere of the tunnel's interior, cool and dry and faintly smelling of dust and damp stone. His headlights reached farther here, painting the walls in steady light. The tunnel was wide enough for 2 full lanes with a generous shoulder, its ceiling higher than it had looked from outside. The walls were concrete, stained in long vertical streaks where water had once run. Old service cabinets punctuated the right side every few hundred feet, their metal doors painted in once bright colors, gone dull. He glanced, briefly, at the radio out of habit. Its display, though off, reflected his own dash lights faintly. He left it that way. The silence felt appropriate, as if the tunnel itself were listening. Ahead, the tunnel curved gently with the line of the hill. The overhead lights hummed softly, a low, constant sound he felt more than heard. The white stripes on the road became his primary anchor, clean and bright in his beams, arrowing along a path that seemed to extend much further than a simple mile. He watched the distance tick by on the odometer. 0.2, 4, 6. The tunnel continued, bending in a slow arc, its exit always implied just around the next shallow bend, and never quite arriving. The first oddness came in the form of a painted sign on the right-hand wall, its letters old and slightly faded but perfectly legible. Slow for curve, 25 miles per hour. There was no curve sharper than the one he was already in. The road ahead showed no sudden kink, no tightening of radius. Still, he eased off the pedal, letting the truck settle into a comfortable 35. The tunnel hummed on. A few hundred yards later, another sign appeared. This one, a crude rectangle bolted to the stained concrete. Honk horn. 1 lane ahead. He involuntarily checked his mirrors and the road ahead. Both lanes stretched on, untouched. No barriers or cones or narrowing of space. No oncoming headlights glowed in the hazy distance. Yet someone, at some time, had put that sign there for a reason. He didn't honk. The sound felt like it would be too sharp, too intrusive in that long, contained space. Instead, he listened harder, noticing how the tunnel seemed to breathe with him, the echo of his own engine returning a half beat behind each rise and fall of RPMs. The odometer added another half mile, then another. The tunnel did not end. He checked the clock. According to the easy math of distance and speed, he should have been through by now, up on the next open curve with the sea fog pressing against his windows again. Instead, there was only more wall, more yellow-lit ceiling, more white lines pulling him onward. His fuel gauge remained steady. His temperature stayed in the green. The GPS, when he risked a quick look, showed his truck icon gliding along the coastal road as if nothing unusual had happened. No interruption, no straight gray line to indicate an underground path. Ahead, something on the wall changed. The flat concrete gave way to a series of shallow alcoves, each one a narrow, arched indentation just wide enough for a person to stand in. In each, a small glass-fronted box hung at shoulder height, some empty, some holding old fire extinguishers gone dull red and dusty. In one alcove, As his light swept past, he thought he saw a shape, a figure standing very still, pressed back against the stone, just a broad outline. A jacket, the rounded shadow of a hat brim. No face, no movement. By the time his brain scrambled to focus on it, it was already behind him, swallowed by the rear view's small rectangle and then gone. He told himself it had been an extinguisher nest, a trick of angle, nothing more. His breathing had gone shallow without his noticing. He forced it deeper, letting the air fill his chest and leave slowly. The tunnel air felt cooler than before, almost chilly, brushing his cheeks through the vents. On the CB, despite being turned down to a bare murmur, a sound rose, a single clipped transmission that popped into existence and out again in the space of a second. Watch your mirrors in the long tunnel. Don't stop. No call sign. No channel ID. Just that calm, matter-of-fact suggestion, delivered in a voice that sounded like any of 100 drivers he'd known. The long tunnel. As if everyone agreed that this one in particular was something different. Up ahead, the lights flickered, not dramatically, but in a brief, synchronized dimming, a heartbeat of darker gray before they came back to full strength. In that momentary lull, the reflection in his windshield shifted. For an instant, past the ghost of his own face and dash, he saw the shape of another cab pacing along beside him where no lane existed, just there in the corner of his vision. Slightly ahead, like the suggestion of another truck moving in tandem behind the wall. The effect vanished when the fluorescence steadied. He swallowed, the small sound loud in the cab. His hands remained steady on the wheel, muscles working from long practice despite the unfamiliar prickle of unease beneath his skin. The next sign on the wall was newer, its paint sharper against the old concrete. No U-turn. No stopping. Keep moving. The letters sat there, simple and unadorned. He realized he had never even considered stopping until that moment. Never thought to ease onto a shoulder that didn't exist and set the brake. The road demanded motion, and the tunnel seemed to agree. The odometer ticked another mile. 2. The clock advanced modestly, yet in the place in his body that measured distance without numbers, the part that knew how long a descent felt, how a certain climb should sit in his muscles, something quietly insisted that this tunnel was longer than any engineers would have bothered to dig for a simple coastal bypass. Then, up ahead, a different kind of light appeared. Not the soft sodium yellow of the tunnel fixtures, but a paler, cooler glow, blurred by the curve. The kind of light that belonged to open air. Relief moved through him, not dramatic but soft and pervasive. His shoulders eased, his grip loosened just a little. The tunnel opened its mouth again, concrete walls flaring outward. He passed under another plaque, unreadable in the quick flash, and out into fog. The change was like stepping from a quiet room onto a damp pier. The air grew heavier, smelling once again of salt and wet earth. The sound of the truck expanded, engine noise no longer constrained, rolling out into the open and back. The guardrail appeared at his right, its top rail beaded with moisture that glittered in his lights. The road curved gently along the cliff, just as the map had promised. The cut of the land looked entirely ordinary. No massive hill betrayed where a tunnel might run. No signage on this side proclaimed its name or length. He checked his mirrors. Behind him, the tunnel entrance was unexpectedly less imposing than it had felt from the other direction. A dark arch set into the rock, its edges softened by ferns and trailing moss, the yellow of its interior lights already vanishing into the thick gray. He glanced at the time. Only a few minutes had passed since he'd seen the first tunnel ahead sign. The numbers made sense. The feeling did not. A few miles later, when the fog lifted enough to show the shadowy bulk of hills against the clouded sky, he pulled into a turnout that overlooked nothing but mist and the faint suggestion of distant wave glow. He set the brake, the hiss, a small punctuation in the quiet, and reached for his worn paper atlas from the door pocket. Tracing the route with a finger, he found the coastal highway, the contour lines, the small, careful notations he'd made over the years. There was no tunnel mark between the state line and the next town. No tunnel icon. No shaded section of road. He sat for a while in the muted light of the cab, the atlas open on his lap, listening to the idle. Outside, fog drifted past in pale bands, indifferent. In the weeks that followed, he asked around gently. When the subject of that coastal run came up, some drivers dismissed him with a shrug and, "I just stick to the inland route." Others frowned, squinting slightly as if trying to reconcile something in their own memories. "Funny thing," one woman said over late-night coffee, tapping her spoon against her mug. "I could have sworn I went through a tunnel out there once. Long one. Haven't seen it since. Thought I was just more tired than I realized." On clear days, when he took that road again, there was nothing but open curves and the occasional shortcut through hillsides, exposed and sunlit. No dark archway, no old stained walls, no alcoves with extinguisher boxes and half-seen shapes. But on certain nights, when the sea fog rolled in at just the right height and the ocean below whispered up at the cliffs, a green sign would appear for some drivers where it shouldn't be. Letters blurred just beyond the reach of their headlights. Tunnel, yksimile. Use headlights, turn off radio, and those who followed its quiet instruction would find for a brief span that the road grew longer and narrower and altogether more enclosed than any map was willing to admit, holding them gently between its cool, humming walls until it decided they had moved far enough along into the small hours to let them go again. Story number 9. The fog didn't roll in so much as rise up from the ground, as if the fields themselves were exhaling. One minute, the Kansas night stretched wide around Tommy's rig-flat land, scattered farm lights, a sky like black velvet pinned with cold stars. The next, a low white band began clinging to the asphalt, pooling in the ditches, thickening until the world shrank to a narrow tunnel ahead of his bumper. He eased off the throttle, letting the big truck settle into a patient, careful pace. The speedometer dropped a few ticks. The hum of the tires took on a dampened tone, softer, as if the sound too were being absorbed. The CB was down low, just enough to murmur. No music tonight. The radio's bright voices had felt jarring against the quiet fields hours back, so he'd clicked it off and let the engine be his soundtrack. The dash lights glowed a muted green, bathing his hands on the wheel in an underwater kind of light. Somewhere to his right, beyond the reach of his headlights, the river curved through its floodplain, though you'd never know it from the view. The fog was the only landscape now. It brushed the guardrails until they vanished, wiped out the fence lines and the far-off silhouettes of grain elevators that usually mark distance like mileposts in the sky. Tommy had been running this route for years. He knew its moods: slick ice in winter, shimmering heat in August, and these nights when the earth seemed to decide visibility was optional. He'd learned to respect each of them. A green sign grew out of the white ahead, letters smeared to a glow and then snapping into clarity as he came close. Mille, ikius kurkede. He glanced at the dash clock. 2:03 a.m. Another couple of hours, and he'd be through this stretch, parked at a truck stop with humming refrigeration units and 2 bright lights, letting coffee steam warm the rims of chipped mugs. The fog thickened another notch, narrowing the edge of the world until his low beams carved almost solid-looking cones in it. The white line on the right shoulder appeared, crisp for a heartbeat, then slid under the hood and dissolved. The broken stripes in the middle felt closer together, though he knew they were exactly where they'd always been. He flexed his fingers on the wheel, rolled his shoulders. The cab's familiar smells: diesel, coffee. The faint, clean scent of laundry detergent clinging to his flannel settled him. The feeling that rose up, anyway, was the old, subtle one that came on nights like this, that he was the only real thing moving through a painted world. Then he saw the lights. Far ahead, through the woolly gray, a pair of small red points glowed, faint as embers. They bobbed and dipped gently with the rhythm of the road, too steady to be reflections or artifacts. Tail lights, holding a careful, unwavering distance. Relief loosened something in his chest. Company. Even if they never spoke, another set of wheels out here meant someone else was reading the same curves, measuring the same distances. He let his foot lighten a hair, holding the same speed, watching. The taillights neither approached nor drifted away, just hung there at the same small size, constant, like a star that refused to move with the rest of the sky. They looked older, somehow, dimmer than the sharp LEDs most cars and trucks carried now. a softer red, almost orange at the edges, the way lights used to look when he first started driving, when everything on the road had a little more blur to it. The CB crackled, a brief hiss, then cleared like a throat. "Fog thick as gravy again tonight," a voice said, tinny and far away. "Convoy, keep it tight. We don't want a repeat of 42. Tommy's hand drifted toward the mic on its clip, more out of reflex than intention. He paused, frowning. He hadn't touched the channel dial all evening. It sat on the usual 19. The voice, though, had a different music to it, clipped consonants, vowels shaped by another era. "Roger that, lead," another voice replied, deeper, carrying a warmth that somehow seeped through the distortion. "Flat ground from here, boys, but don't trust what you can't see. Watch the river turns. Convoy. Lead. River turns." Ahead, the red point slipped a fraction to the right, as if whoever they belonged to was adjusting in the lane. For a second, through a small tear in the fog, Tommy caught a more complete shape, a boxy silhouette, squarer than modern trailers, with rounded edges and a canvas top instead of smooth white aluminum. Shadowy sideboards, no reflective tape, a darker rectangle stenciled with numbers just visible on the tailgate. The glimpse was there, and gone, like a half-remembered photograph. His skin prickled along his arms, not in fear, but in that quiet recognition that something was sitting just to the side of how things ought to be. He swallowed, thumb brushing the mic. "Any convoy up ahead?" he asked, the words sounding too loud in the small cab. "You boys seeing that fog same way I am?" Static answered him, soft and thick. The dim red lights ahead held steady, exactly as they had been. He debated the sane explanations. A vintage truck club, someone hauling wartime props, a late-night caravan of farmers with old equipment on flatbeds. The middle-of-the-night brain suggested stranger things, but he steered it back where it belonged, onto pragmatic shoulders. The CB came alive again on its own timetable. "Lead. This pea soup's something fierce," another voice muttered, younger, nervous. "Can't see the back of my own hood. This river bend's where we lost him last time. We're not losing anyone tonight," the warmer voice replied firmly. "We got markers now. We got distance. Keep your eyes on my lights and nobody lets go." 10-4? A chorus of faint affirmations overlapped, blurring into each other. 10-4. Copy. Yes, sir. Men speaking from somewhere inside the hiss. The red taillights ahead brightened briefly as brakes feathered, then settled back. Tommy eased off a touch himself, matching them. The feel of the asphalt changed under his wheels with a subtle shimmy. The grade dipped, almost imperceptibly. The smell through the vents shifted too, deepening into that damp, river-bottom cool, threaded with the green of unseen reeds and wet earth. He knew this area. A wide, lazy bend in the river paralleled the highway here, fields opening out on either side. The drop was small enough that you barely noticed it in daylight. Tonight, in the fog, it felt like sliding into a bowl. Another green mile marker rose up on the right, ghostly. "Mille ikius kurkiede." He blinked. He was sure he'd already passed 247. He checked the odometer, did the math in his head. By rights, he should be closer to 249. Maybe he'd misread it. Maybe the reflective paint had played tricks in the fog. He watched for the next one. A minute later, another sign shouldered its way through the whiteness. "Mille ikius kurkiede." His fingers tightened on the wheel, knuckles rounding. The numbers stood plain. No smudge, no missing stroke. The same small tilt of the post at the same angle. Ahead, the convoy lights, because that's what they felt like now. A lead in a line remained where they were, neither turning nor pulling away. "Lead. I'm swearing these markers ain't moving," the younger voice on the CB whispered, unnerved. "Feels like we're running the same stretch over and over." "Keep your mind on the line, kid," the older man answered. "Road's funny when you can't see past your nose. Ground's ground. We keep rolling till the fog breaks. Nobody stops on the low stretch." Tommy licked his lips, noticed how dry they felt. The truck's heater clicked as it adjusted. A small rattle behind his seat chimed in time with a seam in the pavement. Everything familiar, known. He could slow down, pull onto the shoulder, if there was one. Wait it out. But the idea of stopping in that milk-thick air, of sitting still while the fog pressed in with nothing to anchor to but the tick of cooling metal, made something in his gut twist. The red lights ahead continued, steady, measured, a fixed point to follow. He settled in behind them. The miles, if they were miles, slid by in the blurred sameness of white lines and faint wall of gray. Each time the mile marker appeared, it read 247. Sometimes the post leaned a hair more left, sometimes right. Sometimes a shredded strip of tire lay at its base, black against the pale. Once, he could have sworn there was nothing by the roadside at all. No sign, just raw ditch and fog. The CB wove in and out, soft transmissions threading through the static like fish through water. Radio says the others never made it clear of the bridge. "Keep your spacing, boys, keep your spacing. Can't see him behind me now, lead." Think they dropped out. The voices didn't sound panicked. Tired, yes. Worn at the edges, certainly. But there was a strange patience in them, as if they were used to this loop, to this stretch where forward and back seemed to blur. Once, for a few heartbeats, Tommy thought he heard something else under the human chatter. The layered rumble of many engines, not just his own. A deep rolling growl that filled the tunnel of fog, vibrating faintly in his chest. Different from the cleaner note of modern diesels. Rougher, less filtered, a chorus of trucks moving as one. He risked a glance at the passenger mirror. For the briefest sliver of a second, there they were, a staggered line of shapes tucked into the gray behind him. Open cabs with canvas tops, rounded fenders, headlamps hooded for blackout, casting only slits of light, faces obscured in shadow, helmets catching the dim glow. Then the view corrected itself. The mirror showed only his own trailer lights smearing red against the fog, the rest swallowed whole. His heart thudded once, hard. He let out a slow breath through his nose, brought his eyes back front. The lead lights held true, twin stars in a little universe of white. Time did that thing it did on the road in the small hours, stretching and collapsing in the same moment. His clock crept forward 2:11, 2:18, 2:24, yet some deeper, more physical sense insisted he'd been in this same low, fog-filled bowl much longer than the hand suggested. Then, so gradually it was almost easy to miss, the fog began to thin. It didn't lift all at once. It lightened, layer by layer. The whiteness ahead became more translucent. The faintest shadows hinted at the edges of the world, tree lines returning as ghostly smears, the black suggestion of fencing, the duller gray of plowed fields. The red taillights ahead blurred briefly, as if seen through a veil of rain on glass, then seemed to brighten as the air cleared between them. Another green sign came into view. This one, somehow, felt heavier before he could even read it. Mille ikuzal. Relief spread through his chest, warm and almost giddy in its quiet way. He hadn't realized just how much the repetition of that other number had been pressing on him. The river bend released him, the grade leveling. The fog, no longer pooled in that shallow, began to shred into long, low strands that clung to the ditches and the bases of fence posts. The sky above remained a blank, starless gray, but the fields had their shape back, and the world stretched farther than his headlights for the first time in minutes? Longer? It was hard to say. He looked up, following the lead lights. They were gone. One moment, they'd been there, two small, steady points ahead, marking a path. The next, the road lay open and empty, straight as a ruled line, tailing off into the thin mist without a single glow to punctuate it. He scanned for an exit ramp, a driveway, any break in the fence where a vehicle could have slipped off. There was nothing, just the anonymous flat stretch of interstate running through anonymous flat land. The CB lay quiet now, emitting only a low, unremarkable hiss. He flicked the mic with a knuckle. "Appreciate the rabbit out there," he said, voice casual, masking the odd unease with familiar phrasing. "Whoever you were, lights did the trick," Static answered, indifferent. He drove another 10 miles before the fog vanished almost entirely. The fields turned into dark rectangles under the high blank sky. A cluster of lights on the horizon resolved into a truck stop, its tall sign haloed in vapor, promising fuel and coffee and hot food under buzzing fluorescence. Inside, nursing a fresh cup at the counter, He mentioned the heavy ground fog by the river to the older driver on the next stool. Just a remark, nothing more. The man, hair silver and beard neatly trimmed, nodded slowly. Down by 247? He asked, stirring his coffee. Yeah, it gets strange there on the bad nights. Strange how? Tommy asked. The older driver shrugged, eyes on the swirl of cream. Lost a whole army convoy in that stretch in the 40s. Fog like this, no good instruments, no satellites to tell you where you are. Half of them took the wrong road by the river and never made the bridge. Folks around here say you can still hear 'em running through when it's thick. He glanced up, gaze thoughtful. Some say if you're lucky you fall in with them and they'll pull you through the worst of it, keep you between the ditches till you're clear. Tommy thought of the old-fashioned taillights, the boxy silhouette with its canvas top, the murmur of layered engines in the white. His coffee tasted suddenly sharper, the heat of it more real. Ever happened to you? He asked. The man smiled, a small private curve of the mouth. Maybe, he said. Hard to say. Night plays tricks. He lifted his cup in a small salute. Best to respect whatever company you get out there, though, living or otherwise. Later, back in his bunk, the hum of idling engines around him like a low, shared heartbeat. Tommy listened to the faint hiss of his CB as it sat on standby. No voices drifted through now, only the quiet, restless sound of an open channel. His eyelids grew heavy. In that drifting space between waking and sleep, his mind replayed the ride through the fog, the dim red lights, the repeating mile marker, the way the ground had felt both familiar and odd under his wheels. He didn't know what he believed, exactly. Only that the next time the river exhaled fog across the road and mile 247 rose out of the white, he'd keep an eye out ahead for an older, softer pair of taillights holding steady in the gray, and that if he saw them, he'd be just a little grateful for the quiet, unseen convoy that sometimes seemed to run that stretch with him when the world grew small. Story. Number 10. On the map, the interchange was just a tangle of lines, 4 highways crossing, ramps curling around each other in tidy arcs like a cloverleaf pinned to the page. On the ground, under a low ceiling of winter fog, it felt like a mechanical knot someone had tied in the dark. Cal was rolling east on the outer loop, a late delivery keeping him out past the hour he preferred. The night had started crisp and dry, stars sharp over the flat Midwestern fields. Then, somewhere past midnight, the temperature tipped and a ground fog began to slide in, quietly and without fuss, until it pooled in every hollow and wrapped itself around the highway. Now the fog rode just high enough to hide the tops of the tall sodium lights and erase the overpasses above him. It reflected his own headlights back in a soft, pale glow, narrowing the world to his lane and the vague, looming shapes of concrete piers rising and vanishing to either side like tree trunks in some man-made forest. His truck felt small here, dwarfed by the invisible architecture of the interchange. The cab was a warm capsule of soft yellow dash light and familiar smells: coffee, dust, a hint of motor oil. The CB muttered quietly, turned down low. More habit than hope for company at this hour. A green sign slid into view through the mist. Exit Vint, Iquate, AD. Interstate 9, Route 61, Business Loop East. The cluster of arrows beneath it pointed in every direction at once. Next to the sign, a smaller yellow placard read, Fog Area, use caution, as if that were news. Cal slowed, not much, just enough to give his brain a fraction more time to sort lines from lines. His GPS showed the interchange as a stylized knot of purple and gray, his rig a tiny arrow approaching the center. The route guidance spoke up in a neutral, unhelpful tone. In 1 mile, use the right lanes to take exit 24B toward Interstate 9 south. The right lanes looked, in the fog, no different from the left. Ahead, white lines diverged and converged in pale, wet streaks. He'd been through here before, but always in clearer weather, when the stacked overpasses marched across the horizon like gray ribs and the lights overhead cast everything in a sodium glow. Tonight, the upper levels were ghosted out completely. Only the lowest structures appeared, concrete columns rising from the fog with the impersonal solidity of monuments. He passed another sign, Exit 24B, 1/2 mile. Keep right. The fog thickened, as if the words themselves had summoned it. It gathered under the overpass ahead, turning that stretch of road into a short tunnel of milky gray. The CB crackled once, brief and sharp. A voice came through, thin and slightly distorted. Watch your lanes on the clover leaf. Fog's playing tricks again. Then nothing but the soft hiss of static. Cal glanced at the channel display. It sat on the usual 19 steady amber. He hadn't heard anyone in a while. The overpass loomed, its underside a dark slate slab vanishing into white at the edges. As he passed beneath it, the sound of the truck changed, the engine's rumble briefly catching and folding back on itself, then releasing as he came out the other side. Ramps peeled off to the right and left, their entrances swallowed quickly by the glow. Reflective arrows on flexible posts leaned away from his bumper as he passed, their black chevrons blurring. The GPS chimed. Now, take exit 24B on the right. He signaled and guided the rig toward the indicated lane. The pavement sloped gently away, a curve beginning to lift him off the main line. The fog seemed to thicken another shade, muting sound further, the world beyond his windows shrinking to guardrail, lane stripe, and that pale enclosing white. The ramp bent in a wide, curling arc, first up, then across. For a brief instant, through a break in the mist, he caught the sense of height, a drop to his left, where another highway crossed beneath, a rise to his right, where something else passed overhead. Then the fog closed in again. His headlights lit the concrete barrier at his side. Water beaded and ran in slow trails down its face. The curve continued. He checked the GPS. The small arrow representing his truck traced the loop of the ramp, moving along a quarter circle toward the icon of Interstate 9. Everything looked normal. The curve did not straighten. He leaned a little into the wheel. That unconscious shift drivers made on long bends. The ramp swung on, feeling less like an exit now, and more like some careful carousel track, circling around a hub he could not see. The barrier on his right changed texture for a few yards, patches of discoloration, darker stains that suggested an older concrete beneath a newer overlay. A green sign emerged from the fog, mounted low on the inside of the curve. Interstate 9 South, keep right. An arrow pointed along the very road he was already on. Cal's eyes flicked to the odometer, noting the third of or while he'd already traveled since leaving the main line. This felt longer. The curve continued. The fog held its shape, a fleece wrapped evenly around the ramp. Somewhere above, unseen traffic hummed on crossed paths. Or perhaps that was just the echo of his own engine slipping oddly through the architecture. Another low sign appeared, almost a twin of the first. Interstate 9 South. Keep right. Very funny, he muttered under his breath. On the CB, a different voice rose, faint as a memory. Missed my turn again. Thought I was heading south. But this thing just keeps circling me back. It sounded like tape played a little too slowly. The syllables drawn out, frayed. There was a small accent he couldn't place familiar, but from a region older truckers tended to hail from, the vowels rounder. Just stay on the ramp, another voice replied, calm and even. Don't take any spurs. Cloverleaf's long in the fog. It'll let you off when it's ready. The reassurance was odd, but the tone put a strange pinch at the back of his neck. He checked his mirrors. Nothing followed him. No headlights. No dark shapes looming from behind. Just his own clearance lights reflected in tiny, damp halos. The ramp finally began to straighten, or seemed to. The curvature eased. The concrete wall beside him dropped away to a metal guardrail, its posts marching into the mist. Ahead, a merge lane appeared, joining from the right out of a white void. No vehicle came with it. The fog just opened a space and then filled it. He breathed out, tension he hadn't noticed unclenching in his shoulders. The ramp spilled him onto a broader stretch of pavement. Overhead, a sign materialized. Interstate 9 South. To City. River Junction. He'd made it. He checked the GPS. The purple line now hugged a new highway, his arrow dead center on it. The name on the display matched the sign overhead. His speed crept back up toward cruising. For 3 or 4 minutes, the road held straight. The fog thinned enough to suggest a median beyond his low beam's reach. Faint, red taillights winked, far ahead, from some unseen car. Then another sign stepped out of the mist. Exit 24, AD, Interstate 9, Route 61, Business Loop East. Cal stared at it, a cold, clean sense of wrongness sliding into place without ceremony. The design was identical to the one he'd passed 10 minutes earlier. Same clustering of arrows, same placement of panels. The GPS, unbothered, showed him approaching the center of the interchange again. "You have got to be kidding me," he said quietly. The CB crackled, like someone shifting in their chair before speaking. Came around again, a third voice admitted, this one older, dry with long miles. "Fog pulled me back to the Cloverleaf. That's twice now." "You'll get it on the third," the calm voice answered. "Keep your wheels rolling. Don't stop on the ramps. That's when it gets harder to find your way back out." Cal's hand hovered over the CB mic. He thought of cut-in local repeaters, pranksters, all the mundane explanations. But the pattern of his own instruments marked something else. Time passing as it should, distance not quite matching. He could refuse the exit, stay on his current path, and force whatever loop this was to break. The thought came sharp and practical. The GPS chose that moment to reroute, the screen flicking, recalculating, then drawing his purple path cleanly through exit 24B once more, as if nothing were wrong. Ahead, the white lines diverged. The green signs glowed faintly in the low enclosing sky. The interchange waited, arms already half wrapped in fog, geometry too complicated to parse in a single glance. He found himself signaling again, guiding the rig toward the right, toward the familiar ramp, heart beating a little faster but hands steady. Habit, and a strange, irrational trust in the pattern he didn't fully understand, steered him. The ramp lifted. The fog wrapped closer. The world narrowed to concrete wall, guardrail, and the slow, patient arc of a curve. This time, he watched the small things. A smear of tire rubber at the base of the barrier, a chipped reflector on a post, a gouge in the asphalt where something heavy had once scraped. On his second pass, they matched what he'd half-noted before. On the third, something changed. The low sign on the inside of the curve bore a different instruction now. Interstate 9 South, keep left. The arrow slanted across the painted lane instead of hugging it. A subtle shift, but enough. Cal's left hand twitched, nudging the wheel a fraction. The lane markers guided him gently inward. A narrow, branching ramp separated from the main one, almost imperceptibly, slipping between barriers instead of following the longer sweep. He took it. For a breathless moment, he wondered if he'd made a mistake, if he'd aimed the entire weight of his rig into some closed spur. Then the ramp tipped down, the curve releasing, and ahead, in the thinning fog, two wide, open lanes unfolded, arrowing away without interference. Behind him, the tangle of overpasses receded, their outlines ghosted by mist. The GPS settled on a new, straight line. The CB hissed, then quieted. He drove another 5 miles before the fog began to fray for good, patches opening over bare fields, stars glimmering faintly through rents in the low clouds. The interchange lights glowed on his horizon mirror, then shrank into nothing. Later, trading stories over weak coffee and strong opinions, he mentioned getting turned around at exit 24 inches, the thick weather. A few drivers nodded with knowing half-smiles. "That not?" one said, tapping a finger against the counter. "Yeah. If the fog's down, it'll spit you back on yourself once or twice. Old design, confuses the sensors, messes with your head. Some folks say it's the ghost of the original Cloverleaf before they rebuilt it, still trying to feed you through its loops. Best ways to just keep moving," another added. "Don't stop on it. Don't back up. Take what it gives you till it decides you've had enough." On clear days after that, the interchange looked like any other. A clean tangle of concrete and steel, direction signs bright and logical. But on nights when the fog lay low and the overpasses vanished into the white, a few drivers swore that the ramps seemed to lengthen, and that if you listened closely on the curves, you could hear faint, patient instructions in the static of your CB, urging you, in a voice older than the new construction, to keep rolling until you found the one subtle turn that led you back out into straight road and open sky.